All right. Hi, everybody. Thank you for tuning in to episode 4 with Cultura. I am team member Krystal Carranza, and today we will be having a discussion with Justina Garcia over mental health in the year of COVID-19.
Hi, everybody.
Justina, I don't know if you want to go ahead and introduce yourself.
Hey, y'all. I'm Justina Garcia. I am currently a clinical therapist at a psychiatric hospital. And I'm also a speech language pathologist assistant. So that's just like a fancy term for a speech therapist. I've been doing that for about 6.5 years. I'm currently in the RGV chapter of Counselors for Social Justice, and I'm also a former officer of the Edinburgh Counseling Student Association, which is where I met Krystal. We're colleagues. We graduated from the University of Texas at RGV, and we were in the same cohort together. So
awesome. Yes. And, I'm so glad that, we crossed paths, right? Because immediately I was like, man, this girl's like my people, like we just like instantly connected, with the things that we care about, very social justice oriented. And so when Misael was like, let's end the year with a mental health discussion, and I was like, it's got to be Justina. She's the perfect person to have this discussion with. And so, me and Justina, we've been colleagues. We were in the program together at UTRGV for mental health counseling, and throughout our program, connecting on a lot of these issues that we saw in our community, nationally, and, coming together in these organizations as well, such as Counselors for Social Justice, the RGV chapter. We were looking for other ways to,
reach our community.
Because within the mental health field, we just still have a lot of questions, right? Like we're taught certain things in grad school, right? But, there's so much more in our community that we need to learn about and apply, and how can we help go beyond just your traditional talk therapy. And so today we're going to get into talking about COVID-19, right? Like this year has just kind of thrown us for a loop, right? Like none of us expected this. We were not prepared for this at all. So something that we are all collectively experiencing, right? Differently too, right? Because, you hear the phrase, we're all in this together, but we're, when you look at everybody and how everyone's struggling differently, we're really not in this together, right? Like we are struggling in different ways, right? Like we're all impacted by this. All of us are being touched by COVID-19, but we all have so many different things that we're struggling with. And you see like the rise in mental health struggles, the rise in suicide rate, right? You see, job losses, healthcare loss. There's just so much grief that happens so quickly, right? And people don't know how to process this. They don't have the tools to navigate this, and us as therapists, we were kind of like, whoa, like, how do we, process all this too, while we're trying to help our clients as well with something totally brand new, right? So I wanted to ask you, like, how has COVID-19 affected you personally? Like what has come up for you? I know a lot of us, some of us had, to stay, got the opportunity to stay and work from home. Some people did not. Some people had to continue working. I know you had to continue working.
Right.
So what was that like for you?
For me, back in March, it was just completely different. We were unaware of the extent of what COVID-19 was going to be about. It was just, oh, okay, it's not a big deal. It's just like the flu, is what we initially thought. So, I was still I do home health, so I was still going to patients' homes, doing about 40 to 50 visits a week. So it was just very, very stressful on not only me, but like like the whole company that I was working for. We didn't know if we had to, this is before mandatory mask usage. This is before like, you know, um, right at the beginning when it happened, which was like around spring break. So for me, like, going to work and not knowing, okay, am I going to bring this home to my family? Am I going to get sick? Are my patients going to get sick? Where have they been and are they being safe so that when I go into their homes to do a session, am I going to be safe as well? And there was a shortage on masks, there was a shortage on gloves, there was a shortage on thermometers, which is something the state had required us to do, was check our temperature daily, check our patients' temperature daily, screen them before we were going to their homes. So it brought on a lot of anxiety for me, something I've never experienced in my 33 years of living. I've never been anxious. I've never been one to ruminate on my thoughts of, okay, like, did I wash my hands? Did I change my shoes? I was excessive when it came to coming home. I would leave my shoes in the trunk of the car. I would, sanitize the doorknobs and like undress in the hallway and like throw my clothes to wash immediately and then shower. And then I was like, okay, I'm able to like hug my son and like my boyfriend and all that. So it just brought up a lot of feelings that I had never felt before. And I'm sure a lot of people felt that way. I didn't have that space to communicate with anybody because I was grateful I had a job still and I was being able, like I was bringing an income to my family, but at the same time, I didn't have anybody that I can talk to and say like, hey, like I'm really stressed out. Like, I don't know if I'm going to get it. I don't know if I'm going to bring it home to my family. It was just more like, okay, shut up. At least you have a job, at least you're still working and, but it was very, very difficult. It still is. But I guess I kind of already been accustomed to it. I'm used to it. I adapted to it. Working and everything's fine and normal, but coming home and not being able to do anything outside of work was very difficult because everything was not normal, obviously.
Yeah, definitely. And bringing up that you had never experienced this before, and then being a therapist, I think we look at therapists to as people that have to have it all together, right? And they have the tools, they have all the resources, right? And that they're the ones helping everybody else, right? But at some point we also have to humanize therapists too, and know that we also struggle, right? Like we have difficulties, we go through these mental health struggles as well. And I know for me, like thankfully, I was able to work from home when this all happened. And what I experienced was I have to sit with myself and I have to like, I'm with my thoughts. I am, I'm isolated. I'm a very social person, right? I'm always out and about, and that's also a loss that people went through, like not having that social interaction that they used to have before. And so having to sit with myself and like, go inward and really reflect on who I am, like what are the things that really matter to me right now,
like
changing.
who am I outside of my workspace and my social network? Like, who really am I? Like, all those questions of what makes me me.
Because we're so like, I mean, in this world that we're in, it's so busy, right? You have to keep yourself productive, always doing something. And, we need to take time to slow down. And, COVID-19 made us, right? It made us slow down and really reflect and look at ourselves. Well, I mean, for some of us, right? Again, there were some people that still had to go out, frontline workers, still out there, putting themselves at risk. But my experience was definitely, different, with having to really get to know myself and, getting comfortable with these parts of me that I haven't really stopped to notice really listening to my body. What do I need? And so, you know, it's starting to look, right, like we're looking up, right? There's a vaccine, there's a light at the end of the tunnel. But, looking back throughout this year, like what have you gained? What have you learned from what we've had to go through? What have you seen in our community that has changed, or what have you noticed that you hadn't before?
The importance of slowing down, like you said, looking inward at yourself, like what really matters, who really matters also, creating boundaries for yourself, being able to say no, or just realizing like, okay, you know what, I really didn't like to do that, and I did it because everybody else was doing it, or because my social network, that circle of friends was doing it. And then being creative as far as like, family nights, date nights, even how else can I connect with my community and my circle of friends if I can't go to a bar, if I can't go to a restaurant or go have brunch on Sunday, different ways, like just texting people and telling them, hey, I hope you're doing well, I hope you're staying safe, or having Zoom parties. I think that was like the norm at the beginning, and then everybody was like, I can't do like another.
I know, we got tired
virtual.
real quick of it. I was like, all right, no more, I'm done.
Okay, no more, I can't do this, right? But just figuring out different ways to be able to connect with people, just so that you wouldn't lose that sense of I guess loss, in that sense, like a loss of connection with people, and just trying to figure out, okay, how do I stay connected with those that I really do care about? That was definitely something you had to think outside of the box, right? Like, okay, I'm going to get dressed up just so that I can go to the living room and have a glass of wine with my significant other, or figuring out ways to connect with your kids. You're home with them all the time now, so really getting to know them on another level that you probably didn't have the time to before, was also something that I learned throughout this whole COVID pandemic.
Yeah, and that's, you brought up something, getting to spend more time with the people in your home, and that could have turned out to be a good thing, or in some cases a bad thing, right? Like you really got to know your partner, and sometimes that didn't end well. And so there's different types of losses that happen, and each one is completely valid. That we did have a lot of loss of life that continues. It's continuing to happen. But people lost their jobs as well. They lost their partners. Domestic abuse and child abuse rose. And there was definitely that call for, we need to open up schools, right? Like we have to send our kids back to school because they're missing out. They're missing out on that social interaction, and what is this doing to their mental health, right? And that's completely understandable too. But this also kind of sheds light on how we use schools as a band-aid, right, for these larger social issues, these larger problems that we just kind of put under the rug, and we hope for schools to fix them, right? And rely so much on teachers to take care of these problems that are deeply rooted and systemic. And so, me, I'm also a school teacher, aside from having my license. And so I see that aspect as well. I love my students, and their well-being is my top priority, right? But also, their health is so important to me too. And so it was really tough dealing with, you have to go face to face, and that happened. I'm back at, at work face to face, and thankfully it's gone, as smooth as it can, right? As much as it could. Our schools are doing, they're doing a good job in trying to protect us. And so, but what I also saw is a lot of people, that are struggling, it's not an individual personal failure, right? A lot of people need money. They don't have access to, resources. They can't afford therapy. And so I see a question, health insurance is a barrier. Absolutely, right? Some therapists don't take Medicare or Medicaid, right? Because it's a grueling process to kind of get through. The payback isn't
that 80%. Great.
Yeah, and so a lot of
therapists also lose out on that money as well to keep their private practice thriving. So I don't remember what the question was, but
what options are out there for people without insurance? So universities always offer free counseling to the public. So if you are a student, there is a counseling center on campus for students, and as well there is a center where clinic. For the community, and it's completely free. And so I always mention that to people that when their insurance doesn't cover or they can't afford it. There's a lot of therapists that also offer sliding scale payments or discounts. They're out there. And so let's see. So going back to, a lot of these clients really need their basic needs met, right? Like there's so many people in poverty, right? Worried about childcare. They lost their health insurance, right? So there's so many other stresses, that COVID-19 brought on top of already, anxiety and depression that people are suffering from. And so it's just compounding. And as therapists and in our sessions, how I think, I don't know, I'm sure for you as well, like one thing that I struggle with is, it's not about diagnosing people. It's not pathologizing people, because a lot of these issues come from systemic issues, right? You're depressed because you can't feed your family. You're oppression, racism still is rampant in the United States, right? Like we see it all the time. It's even more out in the open. And so, I've seen people say things like, money can't buy happiness, right? Like, well, what do we want more money for? And that's a very privileged thing to say, because in the capitalistic society that we are in, right? Money is going to get you your basic needs met, right? And so a lot of our happiness hinges on having those needs met, right? Like, how can you focus on anything when you're starving? You don't have a home.
You don't have any warmth. You don't have shelter. You don't feel safe in where you're currently living in. Just basic needs that, you and I are fortunate enough to have, and some people don't have that privilege. Some people don't have any of that, or even a support system to go to if they really don't have their basic needs met.
Yeah. And and so that's something that I struggle with as a therapist, right? Like, how am I really helping? Am I just helping my clients cope with their oppression, right? Or adjust to these outside forces, just so they can be productive members, go back out and be productive again, right? And so the thing that at least kind of brings me some encouragement, right? When I start to think of these larger issues, in my sessions, what I'm hoping for is my clients to come out and say, or have more autonomy, right? Have the skills to start, creating boundaries in their workplaces, in their relationships, planting those little seeds, so that way it's not just learning coping skills, right, to deal with that, but they're
Right.
also becoming more of themselves, understanding themselves a little bit better.
Yeah, I completely agree with you. I mean, I think it's a lot of the times we were taught in graduate school, especially, that, you know, teach them coping skills and they'll get
Mm-hmm.
through the depression, they'll get through the anxiety, they'll get through the grief, right? But if you go further than that, if you dig deeper, there are some deep-rooted issues here. You know, there is oppression. There, how do I expect my clients to have intimate relationships or love themselves if, you know, they don't even have a home? They don't have shelter. They don't have food for their family or for themselves. You know, right now during COVID, so many people lost their jobs, lost their health care. You know, there's so much uncertainty, and with uncertainty comes like endless anxiety. So
Mm-hmm.
I think a lot of the times it's more than providing just a resource to free counseling or, you know, just bandaging the problem. It's a lot more than that. I mean, if you were to call a homeless shelter right now, you know, to put a client at a shelter, for example, a lot of these places require them to have an ID. Okay, well, does the client have an ID to begin with? Probably not, right? They probably don't have an ID. They probably don't have a permanent address where they can have that ID shipped to them. How are they going to even get a COVID test to enter a shelter to have a place to sleep for the night if they
Mm-hmm.
have no phone? How are they going to even pay for a COVID test? And are they going to stand in line for hours at a time when there's so many cars in front of them to get a free COVID test just to sleep somewhere for the night? So I think, you know, as a counselor, I mean, there's so many more issues than just depression and anxiety and all of this. You know, it's what am I doing for them? How am I
Mm-hmm.
going to provide the proper resources so that they're able to function not only as somebody in society, right? But how can I help them thrive in the society? Um, to be able to come to a place where they're able to not be depressed because of their situation, right? Um, so I think a lot of the times therapists also experience burnout because of this. Like, there's
Mm-hmm.
only so much that we can do with so little time that we're given.
Mm-hmm.
And it goes beyond just labeling with, you know, major depressive disorder or generalized anxiety disorder. You know, there are a lot more than that diagnosis. So it's very difficult for us as therapists to go home and be able to detach ourselves from that, because I mean, it's a constant. I mean, I know for me, I go home sometimes and I'm like, oh my God, did I do enough as a
Yeah.
therapist? Could I have done more?
Yeah.
Did I give enough resources to them? But sometimes, I mean, it, you know, we have to say this is the best that I could do.
Mm-hmm.
And us as therapists have to be at peace with that, even though, you know, it's not always that. It's not always that easy to do.
Yeah, no, definitely. And you know, um, you know, being a therapist too, like you have those moments too when you see your clients like start, advocating and
Mm-hmm.
being empowered, and those are like such beautiful
Yeah.
moments. And so, it's not to you know tell people that therapy is not going to work, right? It does work. It does help in conjunction with several things, right? Like,
Right.
wellness encompasses so many things, right? It's not just therapy, but it's the way you eat, it's your exercising.
Are you getting enough
you know,
sleep?
yes. And there's so much that goes into wellness. Like, how are you connected to your community? Community is so, so, so important. And that's what I love about Craft Cultura, right? It's all about community. And, because we've lost so much of that connection, to each other, to ourselves, to our bodies, right? We don't listen to our bodies. And eventually over
Right.
time, our body's going to tell
Yeah.
us, hey, you got to slow down, like you got to
Yeah.
listen to what I'm saying, because, we end up developing, diseases when we have so much stress, embedded in our bodies, and it just keeps piling and piling up.
Yeah. Well,
And so,
unfilled stress.
yes,
stress,
definitely.
stress, stress that you like just want to ignore, and you kind of contain it, and then you explode, right? You end up
Mm-hmm.
exploding because you've shoved so much down that you just, don't even know what the hell happened.
Yeah.
How might
Let's see. Okay, how might we cope with family members who undervalue mental health and counseling? Oftentimes, your Latinx families have not been. Yes. Go ahead, Justina. Go for it.
Okay, so I think how we cope with family members who undervalue mental health, I think it's just really important to, one, to break that stigma, right? As Latinx families and Hispanics, I mean, we think like, oh, okay, if we say we're depressed, if we say we're suffering with anxiety, it's usually a sign of weakness, or, we kind of get told like, just toughen up, like it's not that big of a deal. But I mean, it is. I mean, we're seeing now that it is a really big deal, right, to deal with. And I think just, telling them like, I need support in this, like I'm struggling and I need you to support me in like even just venting, like allowing me to vent, listening without judgment, not offering any sort of advice, like just actually just stopping what you're doing and paying attention and holding space for that person to sort of vent, right? And I think sometimes we don't see, I guess, like the signs, or we mistake those signs for laziness, right? So say like if you're suffering from depression or anxiety, your sleep might change. You might sleep more, you might sleep less, you might eat more, you might eat less. And I think sometimes we see that as, pues estás engordando, or, like you're just being lazy. But those are signs, I mean, of real mental health struggles. And I think sometimes we often judge those for something else versus, taking them for what they really are, accepting them for what they really are. I don't know if you want to add anything, Krystal.
Yeah, it's very well known in our culture, right, that men don't show emotion, right, especially with the men and the machismo that we have. Expressing that emotion to one another, because it's seen as a weakness, right? And so I think the best thing is, don't give up trying to get your family members, to read that article, or, read this paragraph in this book, or watch this with me. Keep telling them, because you're planting that little seed, right? Like eventually, over and over, they might one day just be like, you know what, all right, I'll check it out, because if you give up on them, that they're not gonna be motivated to try and understand and try to want to learn about mental health and why it's important, why we need it, right? Because and within our culture, we rely a lot on families, right? We keep everything in the family. We're very religious, and that can be in conjunction with therapy too, right? Like you can incorporate your religion with therapy, because a lot of families are like, no, you just need God. You just need God in your life, right?
You just need to pray it away.
Yes. And this is the will of God. This is what God wants, right? But combining the two and saying, you know what, like it's I need to talk to somebody that's not going to judge me, and that there's nothing wrong. I don't have, don't label me crazy if I go to therapy, because that's the stigma in our culture, especially, right? Like only the crazy people go to therapy. And things like this, like bringing more awareness, talking more about it, exposing your family more to it, and saying, look, it's okay. Mental health affects every aspect of our life. Like, why don't you try it with me? Come to a session with me and try it out and see what it's like. Moving into another topic that is something that I am like currently just super fascinated about, because this has a lot of science in it, and my background is also science, and so intergenerational trauma. So that is definitely showing up right now, right? There's a lot of people that have ancestral trauma, right? Generational trauma that's being passed down because Our Black and brown communities have had a lot of trauma throughout history, right? And so that stuff gets passed on, right? And a lot of trauma within culture, like for instance, in our culture, the chancla, right? Like the chancla, that is traumatic, right? Like that's child abuse, and we somehow turned it into a meme, or we laugh about it, and it's now part of our culture, right? And so we always talk about the chancla, but that's an example of trauma being passed off as culture, and so intergenerational trauma, there's a lot of studies, being done, especially that's very recent, that trauma can get passed on through your genetics. And so this is just kind of like blew my mind, right, when I started learning about all this stuff. And so it doesn't necessarily change your DNA, right? It's not going to change your DNA strand, but on our DNA, we have these epigenetic markers, right? And so whenever we experience a traumatic event, it can alter the way some of our genes are expressed, right? So that, especially somebody that's living in a very survival mode, or, has had very intense trauma occurring throughout their life, that can get passed on to future generations. And so another interesting thing is that, your grandmother, what your grandmother experienced while she was pregnant with your mother, she had, traumatic experiences occurring while she was pregnant, that is going to get passed on to you, right? Because at that given moment, when your grandmother's pregnant with your mother, and your mother is forming you, you're a little egg being formed as your mother's developing, right? So there's 3 generations in the same biological environment. So that stuff is just so fascinating to me. And so if we can start learning more about this, and investing more in our communities and taking care of one another, that's how we start preventing some of this trauma to keep getting passed on, right? And like with intergenerational trauma, what could happen is, let's say you've never really experienced anything really traumatic, and you're like, why am I depressed? Why am I so anxious, right? When nothing has really given reason to, or, and then you start thinking, there's just something wrong with me. There's something I'm doing wrong. What do I need to change about myself? When it can actually be this intergenerational trauma that's being passed on.
Right.
And, let me check the questions really quick. Kids. Yes. With the parents being mindful. Okay. So, okay. So this is like childhood trauma, right? Childhood trauma is something that, and we also have to take a look at the way we understand what trauma is. Sometimes we just look at trauma as an event that happened, and when you think of it, you hear the word trauma, it's like, okay, you witnessed like a murder, you were raped, something
you were physically abused.
Yeah, something very intense. But trauma can also be something that's happened over and over, verbal abuse, emotional abuse. There's so much that can be, it's trauma. And trauma really is not what happened to you, but what's happening inside of you. How did you respond and react to, your external environment? So trauma is like what's inside, and how, what you're feeling inside of your body, right? It's a wound that happens to you. And so as a child, when you're experiencing this trauma, and we live in a super highly traumatized society, everybody, I mean, pretty much everybody has had some kind of trauma. whether they're aware of it, they've put it into, you know, their subconscious, they're not dealing with it, right? Or they are. But everybody has had some kind of trauma. And children, especially, right, at their age, they, you know, as they're developing, as they're growing, you know, the things that we tell them are going to show up later in life, right? They internalize that, you know. So as a child, were you told you can't act that way, right? Or you have to hide who you are because that's not acceptable, you know. So then you grow up as an adult, and you don't even know who you are, and we struggle with our identity because as a child we were told, you know, we're not supposed to be this way. And so you see a lot of people struggling with trying to figure out who they are because they've been told so long, you know, not to be who they are. People didn't listen to you. You know, a lot of times we invalidate our kids' emotions. I'm guilty of it too, you know, and I have to stop and think like, no, what am I teaching my child when I tell her to stop, you know, making noise, or, you know, because it's bothering me, or I'm doing work and it's frustrating me, right? You know, we have to listen to our children. We have to let them express themselves in the way that they need to. They're children. And so I don't know if you want to add anything to that, Justina.
No, you hit it right on the nail. Just validating them, making sure that we allow them that space to be themselves, because if we keep constantly telling them, don't be this, don't be that, you know, they interpret it a certain way, and that becomes their core belief. So then they grow up thinking like, oh, I'm not good enough. You know, I wasn't safe to be myself. So they interpret all of these things internally, and then they grow up to be these adolescent teenagers who, you know, seek that validation somewhere else because they didn't receive it at home. They didn't, you know, validate themselves. And then add social media on top of that, and they're already seeing themselves not be like everybody who they're following on social media. So that adds to them not being secure and safe enough to be themselves. So, I mean, it's a constant fight within themselves to figure out, who am I? You know, what am I allowed to be? Or I can't do this because it's going to upset mom or dad, or, you know, and sometimes we have too high expectations on our children, right? Like, and I'm guilty of it. You know, I put my son on a pedestal, like, I need you to do this, right? But over time I've learned, like, hey, like, it's okay if he doesn't get all A's, you know, it's okay if he likes that kind of music, or, you know, because he's his own human, you know. And if you humanize our children, they're able to see the humanity in other people, and so they grow up being able to see, you know, they're able to see that in other people in the community. They're able to be kinder people,
and accepting of others.
And accepting of others, you know, just have unconditional positive regard for other people, and understand that, you know, there's differences of opinions, there's differences of values and morals, but they're able to respect other people because we respect them as parents, you know, as being children, and allowing them to just be, instead of, you know, trying to create them to be this other person that they're not.
Yeah. And, you know, as adults, and when we start having these moments of fear and like really questioning ourselves, that's when like our inner child starts popping up and is like, what do I need right now? You know, like, what did I not receive when I was a child? And so that starts popping up. It's going to start popping up in your relationships, in your adult relationships with people, right? So the needs that you did not have met when you were younger are going to surface at some point later in your adult life.
Yeah. And you'll definitely see them, I think, come up more when you're in a relationship with someone. You often find that you are not getting your inner child needs met. So, I mean, those will just pop up, and it's like, okay, well, what do I need? Well, I needed reassurance. I needed, you know, validation. I needed to play. I needed to find, or just to be happy. I needed to be content or safe, even something so basic as I need to be safe. And sometimes we don't offer that to our kids, you know, especially during this whole pandemic. Like, You know, I'm sure kids are freaking out too. How many times have we reassured our children, like, hey, it's okay, like, we're in a pandemic, but you're safe. Like, you have shelter, you have food, you know, I'm here if you need to talk to me about anything. Just providing that space for them. I mean, they're so fragile as kids that we sometimes forget they're kids. We expect them to think and function the way we do as adults, and it's not fair to them at all.
Yeah, absolutely. And it's just something that I'm trying to always be mindful, you know, me as a parent, I'm sure you as a parent, you know, who are we raising, you know, because these, you know, children are going to grow into adults in this society, right? Like what kind of people, we don't want them to be mini us, right? Like little mini me's. They're their own individual people, little humans, right? Trying to figure out their way in the world too, right? And we just have to be supportive of them. All right, so moving on to the next topic. So, sorry, that's my dog. So social justice, activism, burnout. I think, Penny. Penny. Okay. I'm sorry, y'all. And so, you know, we saw a lot of violence on the media, right? It's so immediate and accessible. We see, you know, and especially, you know, our you know, Black communities, our brown communities, seeing this trauma, you know, over and over and over again, and being exposed to it. You know, vocalized racism increasing. We had an election year, right? Oh my goodness. You know, we could go on and on about that. You know, it was difficult organizing, right? Because me as a person, I love to connect in front of people, and I like to organize and get stuff done face to face. And so it's just, it was difficult to try and do everything online, everything on Zoom, and it just didn't feel like it was enough, you know? And so throughout like the summer, especially when I was doing work with, you know, counselors for social justice and with Cultura, you know, I just felt like I need to be doing more. Like, you know, what can I do? Like I was trying to read everything, and I was trying to like be super knowledgeable in everything. You know, how can I give back to the community? You know, like they need us more than ever. Like, and it was just, I ended up just completely crashing. I was like, you know what? I can't. I need to just completely disconnect. I'm, you know, getting off Facebook. I'm not going to read the comments on our local news pages because it's just infuriating sometimes. I'm like, oh my goodness. Like there's just a lot of ignorance, you know, too. And so to keep myself from allowing that to get me angry and, you know, the burnout that I was feeling, I was like, okay, I need to just completely disconnect from stuff, right? Like, I need to just, what do I need to feel in myself right now? And, you know, I started like, I mean, one thing I did, and I think a lot of people did too, was stocking up on plants. You know, I have them everywhere. I don't even know where to put plants anymore in my place. So I stocked up on plants, on candles, you know, things that just made me feel much better, right? And even sometimes taking that break, you feel guilty about it, right? You're like, especially being a person of color, you know, a woman, you know, feeling like you always have to prove yourself. And we'll get into imposter syndrome in just a second too, because that's another big thing.
Another whole topic.
A lot of us suffer from. But yeah, I just really had to stop and be like, it's okay. Like we're going through a pandemic, you know, like this is normal to feel like, you know, if you're not being productive, okay, that's fine. Right. You know, like this is something that, you know, we have to like stop and slow down and take care of ourselves, right? Because burnout is just, you know, if you're not, you know, you're not watering you as a plant, right? How are you going to grow, and how are you going to help others, right? Like you can't, what's the saying? Like you can't pour from an empty cup, right?
You can't pour from an empty cup.
So you have to take care of yourself too.
Yeah. No, but absolutely. I had to completely disconnect myself from social media because that guilt was real. Like, I felt if I didn't share enough on Instagram stories, if I wasn't reading up on it, if I wasn't watching the news, if I wasn't, I guess, up to date with what was going on outside of, RGB even, I felt super guilty. I'm like, am I a good enough therapist? Am I good enough to counsel, people of color or, my own community? It was, very difficult, but I think I had to, stop overwhelming myself with, trying to fill myself with all the information because it was just too much. It was too much for me. I had to just, you know what, I'm going to bake a batch of cookies and that's going to be good enough for me, right? Of course, just, making sure that you did as much as you could and not overtaking on too much was definitely something I had to do.
Yeah, because sometimes we have difficulty setting boundaries, right? Because there's just so much more expected of us to be able to be at the level of what we were told that we had to be, right? Like, like you're a woman, you're a person of color, like you're going to struggle more. You have to work even harder. And so when you have that mentality embedded in you, it's very hard to stop and take a break. And so that's where this whole imposter syndrome also comes into play, right? Like feeling like you're not qualified, you don't have enough experience, even though you do, right? Even though you do, you start questioning yourself. Somebody more knowledgeable than you, are they going to like critique you, say something? Am I going to say something wrong? Like you and I, even before having this discussion, we were like, oh God, like, are we even ready for
freaking
this?
out? Yeah. I mean, we're newly licensed counselors. So it was just like, okay, like, am I qualified enough? Am I experienced enough? Did, graduate school prepare me enough for this or to speak on certain topics? Definitely imposter syndrome is very real on every level that you could possibly think of. It's very real.
And then people find, you're thinking people are gonna be like, this person, you're gonna be found out, people are gonna think you're a fake, you're a fraud. But then you have to really ground yourself and be like, nah, I worked for this, like I deserve to be here. I need to take up space.
Right.
And, just like you said, the AOC moment, right? Like I need to take up space. I need to
be here and I am allowed to take up all the space and be knowledgeable and be brave enough to do this. Yeah, definitely.
All right, let's see. We have a question. It says, what do you think is the best way to help students cope with returning to school? Having anxiety of being in a room with others and not having the option to stay home. Working with students daily that need to eat, remove their masks, 2 seats away from the next student. And great question. Like there's so much that has to go into that and creating those safe spaces for our students, right? And so, the teacher kind of setting that classroom culture, right? Like in here, we're doing our best to make sure that we are providing as safe as a possible environment and learning experience. And in that's a difficult thing for a teacher also to do, right? Because we're also worried about our own safety at the same time. And so I think and this is what I've done. Like this is my own personal experience with my students. I straight up told my students, you know what? This year is not your average year. This is not a regular year. Your mental health is what's most important to me. We're gonna catch y'all up. That's what teachers do, right? Like teachers are superhumans, you're not losing this year, and letting them know that they are important to you. Like their well-being is the utmost priority. The lessons will come later, that's how the best way to connect with your students is you let them know that you care about them. And then everything falls into place, right? You know, they listen to you more. You know, they want to share stuff with you. And then it also goes to with your school. How is your school providing those safety measures and making sure that they're being enforced, right? You know, because you could have one teacher enforcing them, right, but then another teacher not really, or being really lax with rules. So, you know, what can you do with your students while you have them? You know, give them that reassurance. You know, tell them that they are safe.
I think it also goes back to parents also, like just parents telling them like, okay, you know, I have to send you to school because I have to work, and I unfortunately, like, this is the situation. I'm just reassuring them that they're safe, you know, providing them with maybe a handheld Germ-X, or, you know, a pack of Clorox wipes, even if they're like in a Ziploc bag, and just reassuring them that they're going to be safe at school. I think having that conversation beforehand, before sending them back, is super, super important. You know, trying to find coping strategies and teaching them coping strategies that they can utilize at school, like deep breathing, you know, orienting themselves, grounding themselves, like in the classroom, with their five senses, like, what do you see? What do you smell? What do you taste? Just little things like that prior to them going to school, so that they're at least, you know, prepared if they begin to have anxiety at a school setting. Is really, really important, because I think the anxiety has even happened prior to them returning back to school, I would assume.
Yeah. And we also have another question. How do you recommend we approach conversations from students stressing about increase of conflict between parents at home? And yeah, that's also happening as well. And, you know, unfortunately, I mean, we can't, you know, control what's happening at a student's, at their homes, right? But what we can do is provide them, you know, the opportunity to express how they're feeling, what they're feeling, you know, because if that's occurring at their homes, you know, they probably don't have that opportunity to talk to anybody about that, you know. So just allowing yourself to be available, you know, can mean so much to a student, you know, so they can, you know, get their concerns out, you know, just letting them vent completely, because sometimes they don't have that, they don't get to, they're scared to. And so I hope that answered
that question.
See, what is your standpoint on TE's decision on return to in-class instruction once we return? How can we prepare? And so I think it's also district to district, right? I know with the district that I'm at, the parents still have the option to keep their students at home for the entire year. And so I think with TEA, there are some regulations in place that to be able to allow that, there has to be a certain amount of students on campus. And so, so far what I've seen, I can't speak for other districts, but for the one that I have been at, you know, the administration has been, you know, really making sure that distance is happening. You know, within the classrooms, there's not too many students. I think I have a max of 7 students, and I have a very large classroom. And, you know, we've provided the students on campus with face shields, you know, all the PPE is provided as well. Our teachers are completely enclosed. The students are pretty much still, you know, on their computers, you know, while I'm still on the computer teaching, you know, the students at home. And so how I personally feel about it, you know, of course, I would want everyone to, what is the best option for everybody? And I would want everybody to be safe, right? But, you know, there are some parents that do need the students in school, right? Because they have nobody to watch their kids. And so that goes back to, again, a larger problem of having childcare accessibility, you know,
or being able to afford childcare.
Yes,
even. Because I mean, sometimes they can't afford it. And unfortunately, school was the only place for them to have somebody to take care of their kids while they're at work.
Yeah. And we are kind of coming towards the end. And so, Misaya, we have a question from him. You know, what's your favorite part about being a counselor from and in the RGV? And I think, I mean, for me personally, like, I'm so damn proud to be a Latina, right? And a therapist, because we only make up 5%, 5% of all mental health professionals. And that's crazy to me, right? And so, you know, down here in the Valley, right, we don't really think about
there's
that.
so many of us, yeah. But like on a national level, I mean, I'm so damn proud too. And we're single moms. So I mean, add that on top of that, and it's you know, it's an amazing feeling to be able to give back to the community in this sense.
Yes.
Yeah.
Especially here on the border, we're so complex, right? We have a mixture of just so many different, you know, there's a lot of complexities along the border, but our culture's so rich and so beautiful and so wonderful.
Yeah.
And so I just, there's one question real quick that I want to address. How as adults can we advocate for our children? And so the best way to do that is address your trauma. You know, once you start working and recognizing your behaviors, you know, recognizing if, you know, certain things are affecting your children, you know, you first have to be aware of it to even know, what do I need to change, or how do I need to, you know, meet their needs better. Yeah.
And heal from it. I think it's also important to put your feelings into words, you know, describe what you're feeling, describe what it is that you've gone through, so that you can, you know, not allow it to pass on to them. And, you know, you're able to accept them also for all the feelings that they're currently experiencing also. I think we undervalue them a lot of the times, just we don't put their feelings into importance oftentimes, because we're totally dealing with our own as single parents, or, you know, addressing our own needs and our own unresolved trauma, and trying to heal from that at the same time while raising them. So
yeah. And so one thing about, you know, the greatest thing about therapy and starting your healing process is you start to notice all the relationships around you. You know, you start to heal that as well. And it's just a continuum. It's a continuum, right? Like, you heal your future generations and you heal your past ones. You know, like our past ancestors didn't have the opportunities that we have today. They didn't know, they didn't have the coping skills. They didn't have access. And so if we begin to work on ourselves, we are healing so many other people around us as well, and helping that and breaking those like generational curses.
Generational traumas.
Yes.
Yeah, definitely.
All right. So that actually went by so fast. You know, we're like, okay, are we even going to have enough to talk about? But you know, this turned out so much. It went so much better than I was, you know,
expected
about. Yeah. So I just want to thank you all for tuning in so much. Let us know if there's any topics that you want us to address in the future that we can talk about. You know, it's all about community and connecting with one another. So thank you all so much. I truly
thank you guys.
Yeah, and Justina, thank you for joining me on this and making it.
Thank you for asking me.
Nerve-wracking, but awesome. This was great, and I hope we can do this again soon. And we
thank
hope
you guys.
to interact with y'all in the future. Yes, be safe, y'all. Thank you.
Thank you.